For those of you who don't know me or are unfamiliar with me, I'm Melinda Cates and welcome to I Make a Difference. This video is one of my emergent processing series, and you're probably thinking and wondering, my what? What is emergent processing? Well, it's where I share with you elements of my journey and adventure, where I share with you the processing that I go through and the shifts and changes and new experiences that I have as a result of my unwavering commitment that has been with me for many decades to discovering and being me, the true me. And I share with you the steps that I take for these experiences to unfold, and I share with you the changes that happen so that you're aware of what is possible. In this video, it's about me letting go further layers of holding responsibility for people in my life, specifically my mother, and the magic that unfolds as a result of doing so, where the fear and vulnerability around my mother that I have held that has been driving my need to take responsibility for my mum has been preventing me from actually experiencing more depth in my connection, more happiness in my relationship with her. And I never really realized that until the last couple of months. I will share with you the different focuses of my over-responsibility and how in the process of letting go my responsibility for others, I actually have created the space for more magical processes to unfold in my day-to-day life, and especially in my relationship with my mum. So where do I begin? To give you context, because it's important. You've got a little bit of background about this. Since I was approximately 10 years old, I chose to take responsibility and hold responsibility for my mother. Initially, or in the earlier days, I held responsibility for her physical safety and actually protecting her from my father physically. Then over time, as I moved into my later 20s, I actually took more responsibility around her emotional well-being and her happiness. It extended even more in my 30s, where I now reflect on and see I started taking and holding a level of responsibility for her future and ensuring that if anything happened to my mum with regards to her home, her safety and security, she was going to be okay. And this was expressed in some decisions I made around purchasing a property a number of decades ago. It was not only for my future, but I actually really clearly remember saying that if anything happened to Mum, well, she now had somewhere she could live. I hear those words and I can see how I actually put her needs ahead of my own, even in this situation. And it was because I knew I could handle things. I was strong, I was tough, I'd be okay. But I reflect now, and the truth was, yes, at one level back then I was strong and tough, but at an emotional level I wasn't. I was a real mess. So I purchased a property, not just for me, but also for my mum. I reflect on my decision and do you know what? I actually get that I knew what was going to unfold. So I knew from my knowing, which is the voice of my soul, I knew what was going to happen. And one of the things I love is the guidance that I get from my knowing and what it's given me as far as what I need to do and how much I valued and listened to it. I know there were still elements of my over-responsibility that were also wrapped up in my decision-making around the property. Because guess what? It was exactly what happened. About 5 years ago, due to circumstances, my mum needed somewhere to have a home that was hers, where she could feel safe and secure. And that home ended up on the property I purchased. Isn't it amazing what I knew? And the property was there for her to have somewhere that was a safe haven for her. It has taken years of mindfulness, years of facing myself, overcoming guilt and actually catching myself and stopping myself from acting on rescuing my mum. It's taken years for me to unravel what and how I conditioned myself and believing I was responsible for my mum and what I believed I needed to hold and do for my mum. The insane thing about over-responsibility and wanting to protect and save my mum in this situation is that my mum never actually verbally asked me to rescue her, to save her, to take responsibility for her. She never asked me to do any of what I've done for her. She also never stopped me from doing what I did either. And I now see she was not meant to, because it was learnings for both of us in our human adventure and what we needed to go through to get to where we are. You see, Mum became conditioned to receive my support, conditioned to access and draw upon my strengths and protection, especially during the time she was vulnerable and physically vulnerable. Let me clarify though, my mum has never taken it for granted. I recognise that my need, yes, my neediness to take responsibility for and hold responsibility for my mum came from my neediness to be of worth to her, to be of value and to be important to her. She's the only family member who has consistently through my life actually really been interested in me. She's the only one that's taken time with me or connected with me fully. There was a little bit from my auntie, and there still is on occasions, and in recent times there's a lot from my cousin. So I actually made my mum responsible for my emotional well-being in terms of me doing things for her. It made me feel I had some level of importance to her. It made me feel I was of value to at least someone in my family, a mum I could rely on. It's pretty sad what we do in our families and in our relationships. You see, I was actually scared that if my mum did not love and value me, then I actually had no one, and no one would. My emotional healing in the process of letting go the responsibility for my mum and all the areas I have been holding on to, well, it's involved multiple layers of complexity, and that's what the human process is like. I've worked through guilt, my lack of self-worth, my own importance and value. I've worked through rejection, and my favourite, my neediness. And I'm still working through some of it. It has taken strength of commitment to myself and trust in myself to release my feelings of duty and obligation that I've felt to parent my mum. When I first started letting go of responsibility, I started out doing so with my fingers crossed, hoping and praying that she would be okay. I still kept an eye on her, but I didn't want her to experience pain or hurt as I let go of the responsibility I've been holding. I was acting on what I knew I was to do, but I was fighting with my emotions, and my head was saying, protect her, don't let go. So it took strength. My knowing and my want to heal me was stronger, and I wanted, most importantly, to consciously experience being a daughter to my mum, not a parent to my mum. My mum has treated me as her daughter in my younger years and during my life. But the question I have is, have I actually allowed myself to experience being her daughter? And that's an interesting one I discovered during this process, one that no doubt I'm yet to explore and will potentially be another emergent processing. I also wanted to release the responsibility hold I've had with my mum so my mum could grow and so mum could be fully in her independence, or as far as she wanted to take it, without me and my process getting involved in it. I also wanted to, and I knew, her and I deserve to have different experiences with each other whilst we have the time together. And that's what's been happening in the last couple of months. What those experiences would be, I was not sure, as I've not had them. They were going to be new experiences. I just knew there were new ones to be had in our interactions. And it was a matter of me opening up to, being aware of, being receptive to, and recognizing where there were opportunities for things to be different. And recently, a couple of months ago, I identified one. Mum, Alan, my partner, and I were playing cards one weekend, something we do regularly together. And here's my neediness. Guess who generally wins? Yes, me. Not all the time, but I am ahead at the moment. And Alan's won a few lately, so we'll have to focus on that a little bit. The other two, they're generally so focused on each other's game and beating each other or having fun digs at each other that I'm sure they sometimes forget I'm even there. So with the focus not being on me, I come along and win. Then they remember I'm there. Yeah, and I get, oh, not again. Well, this particular game, I watched and became aware of Mum starting to be silly and joking around. It's so awesome when she does this, and it's just so wonderful to see her so happy and light. But it was all directed at Alan. In fact, she wasn't even looking at me, and he was responding in kind. It was like I could feel myself standing back and outside of the interaction, looking in and watching it. It was like I didn't even exist and was not there. I'd gone into a space for me to process. This brought back feelings and pictures in my mind of interactions throughout my life where I've observed and experienced my mum having laughs and jokes and fun with others, but not with me. And in that moment, I saw how Mum and I do not have fun together. We don't laugh together. And I had additional clarity to this, along with a tiny amount of sadness, but recognition of an opportunity. But I had clarity as to why. Mum has previously said to me, with how I've been reactionary in the past, she's been scared to say some things, scared that she may get it wrong, that she may trigger a reaction in me. Old conditioning from our old interactions. And this conditioning has influenced her ability to see how things are different now, to see and hear where I've come to and the changes in how I am. But it's also a sign of an area of growth for my mum and her moving beyond what she's held on to. She's been close with me in terms of support and practical help, and she's been brilliant in those areas for me, but has tended not to get close to me emotionally and even energy-wise or even physically, except when she has been vulnerable physically. I'm the one she's turned to and trusted and been able to rely on. She has said previously that getting close to me means she has to get close to herself. So that said it all. Yes, I've been reactionary and very sensitive to rejection. It's been a huge area for me to work through. And this is due to feelings of rejection from my family, something I've worked diligently with to heal and change as far as my reactions went. In that moment with the interaction between Mum and Alan when we were playing cards, I realised how serious I was. In fact, I could see it, I could feel it, I could hear it. I was it. I also identified that my over-responsibility of my mum and how seriously I've taken it and that commitment that I've had has resulted in me being serious, resulted in me being practical and a problem solver around her. So how could I joke around and have fun with her if I held responsibility for her? It was a serious burden to shoulder. Oh my gosh. I realised there'd been no room for fun and jokes in our relationship from either of us. And I realised in that moment I had denied myself this fun and joy with my mum. After this realisation, a few other things that happened as well. Further opportunities for me to release my over-responsibility for my mum. And I took action on them. One of the areas was every time I go to town, which is about an hour away, or Alan and I go to town, we ask Mum if she wants to come with us. And it's not just over responsibility and making sure she's looked after and happy that drives this. We love spending time with Mum. But the over responsibility was some of my initial focus. So I had an opportunity to unravel this pattern, unravel this belief, unravel this behaviour that I had been expressing for a long time. I had a trip planned to go to the nearest city, which is a little further away in about 2 hours drive. And I made a conscious choice this time not to ask Mum. And I did so for the purpose of me changing the pattern and freeing myself of the need to ask her, so that in the future I had choices. If it felt right to ask Mum, I would do so, but it would not be coming from over-responsibility. And if it felt right not to ask her, then I was comfortable with that, and there was no guilt that I would feel. And I didn't feel guilt in this situation. In fact, I felt no emotional drive that I should ask her. The whole process of me accepting what I was doing meant that all of it went right out of my mind and my processing. I'd let it go. My mum, in the meantime, heard that I was going to the city. And guess what? She came and asked me if she could come. The pattern changed in 2 days flat. So the responsibility I'd been holding now had moved to Mum. She was holding responsibility for it. And the responsibility was in the right places. Maybe people may not recognise these types of processes happening in their life. They're quite subtle at times and perhaps not that obvious, and we can get so familiar with them. But I'm really conscious of them and committed to changing them and working with them as part of my growth. So I acknowledge all of them, or as many as I'm aware of, as awesome steps in my growth. I said to Mum, awesome, absolutely come with me, I'd love you to. Just a side note and give you a bit more context here. My mum's waiting for a hip replacement and is in a lot of pain and cannot walk very well at the moment. She also has arthritis, and it's been around for a number of decades for her. It's very impacting on her hands, her feet and her elbows. And at the time she had a pinched nerve in her elbow. She also has not been trusting of people working with her body due to the conditions she has. And this is just some of the background knowledge for the rest of the sharing that I'm going to be doing. So after I said yes to her coming with me, she asked me for the number of the osteopath I'd visited in the city a few weeks before because he was awesome. She was taking responsibility for herself and her body. She rang them, please note, only 2 days' notice before we were going, to see if she could get in with them, and she couldn't. But she could see their physio instead. She got off the phone and was toing and froing about whether to go to the physio or not because she had a mind set on the osteo. My response to her was, Mum, this is exactly who you're meant to see, because that's the person available, and if it was meant to be different, it would be. And your poor body needs help, so trust the process. 2 days later, we set off on our journey, which became an adventure, a wonderful adventure. As we were travelling, I reflected on the fun Mum and had with Alan during the card game. Then I reflected on whether I've had fun with Mum. And what came to my mind was, rather than fun, I've had some really happy times with her. Times that have been filled with curiosity and happiness and freedom and laughs. I asked Mum, what were some of the happy times she'd had with her mother, my Nana, who I'd had lots of happy times with. Her reply was that she had shared times with her mum, experiences that they shared together rather than happy times. This was a really interesting distinction, one I hadn't thought about or been aware of with regards to my mum and Nana, but I could see it clearly. I then shared with her the happy times I remembered experiencing with my mother, like her taking my brother and I for walks on the rocks at the beach, looking at crabs and starfish and sea anemones, and the ones you'd put your fingers in very respectfully and gently, and they close around your finger. And how Mum would get rolls of butcher's paper, and she would take us to the movies with our friends. And when we got home, she'd give us paints and crayons and pastels to draw our favourite scene from the movie on the paper. When I was little, we had an old shed out the back on our farm, and she divided up all the walls in the shed, and my brother and I and our friends got to paint a section each. She would stop at random farms and probably trespass and take us mushroom picking, and the joy that she got from that and the joy we felt around it. She would walk down the street with us as teenagers doing bizarre things to embarrass my brother and I, like turning up at my brother's boarding school to pick him up from weekly boarding, and she sat in the car with her little dog on her lap calling out, "Johnny darling, Johnny darling." She was and can be so naughty, and my poor brother was so embarrassed. Then the times I had in Australia with my mum, where she worked with me delivering the first I Make a Difference course in Alice Springs with a group of Aboriginal Australians. I remember how precious and special that was and the laughter we had. And there was a couple of ladies in the group who would say to her, "Wendy, you talk too much." Then I remember my mum turning up to stay with us in Perth, and she was wheeled through arrivals in a wheelchair. She wanted to go for a ride in one, and she had a chicken hat on that she'd bought. She is awesome. She wanted to surprise people at the airport, and she does like a bit of shock factor now and then, my mum does. The funny thing was that her plane had been delayed and it arrived at midnight, and there was virtually no one in the airport except for me. So she did get a giggle from the people who were looking after her and wheeling the chair, and she got a giggle from me. Also travelling miles in Australia with my mum, talking and exploring. And a very special birthday of my mum's, where Alan and I took her and her husband at the time to this magical, beautiful place to stay, and the joy we had, where one of my favourite photos of my mum and I was taken. Then my mum finally getting to experience having her own home that's hers, that's safe. Yes, on the property I purchased. So much of my life has been focused on the pain, the hurt, what's not right with it, the rejection. And what was beautiful about the conversation in the car this day with my mum was that I was taking time with my mum to remember the happy times, to value them, to feel them again, and to own them. Well, that was some of the beginning of our journey and adventure. Mum and I got to the city, did some shopping, and then decided to go and get lunch. Mum suggested a place she'd been to a few years before with a friend of hers, a friend who is a real foodie, and so we headed there. She'd mentioned it to me previously, so I sort of had an idea of where it was. We managed to get a car park very close to it, so this was brilliant because it meant Mum didn't have to walk very far, because remember, she's waiting for that hip replacement. The other bonus was that it was on the opposite side of the road to the whole food store that she wanted to get some products from. Oh my gosh, the cafe. Well, it had something, as far as food goes, that I'd mentioned to Mum a couple of days prior that I hadn't thought about for years, that I've been wanting to eat, as it's been some time since I've done so. And you know when you get that taste in your mouth and you just want to eat the food that your gustatory process is salivating over? Well, it's those little bread baskets that have fish savoury in them, and they're not really a pie because they are open, and they're not really quiche. And the one in the cafe wasn't really bread because it was phyllo, but it was close enough, and I wanted it. And Mum was, oh my gosh, a cheese chive ham scone, just what she wanted. Well, we sat down to eat the food. And the scone had too much baking soda in it and was dry. The coffee was terribly bitter and awful. and they'd microwave the fish, whatever it was, pie/quiche/bread basket, which was phyllo. And you microwave phyllo and it goes soggy. So I asked for a replacement or for it to be heated in the oven. Well, I expected with great customer service that they would actually replace it, because if they used the one that I'd taken a bite out of, it was going to be dead because it would have essentially been cooked 3 times once it had been put in the oven. But no, they put my fish, whatever it was, with the bite in it, in the oven. Oh, and I forgot to mention, they put a dollop of tomato sauce on the side of the plate to go with what I was eating. Or it was like, who does this? They brought back my fish basket, phyllo basket, and I was, okay, let's just eat this. And when I went to eat the fish pie phyllo something, I discovered this giant hard-boiled egg in it that was taking up most of the space. So there was very little fish in it. Mum and I, well, we laughed and laughed and laughed about how we had specifically driven to this part of the city. It's about 15 minutes from the city centre to have a lunch at the amazing cafe she'd been to, and how we were both so looking forward to having the food we ordered, and we were both hanging out for a coffee after a couple of hours of driving. And what a disaster this was. Even the employees looked miserable in the place, sadly. In the past, my mother and I, and our over-responsible, truth-speaking, fairness and justice ways, would have got up and asked for a refund, given them feedback respectfully, and left. My mum has always been comfortable doing this and voicing what is true for her and what she deserves as far as this area goes. And I have followed in my mum's footprints. But we didn't do it this time. We actually changed a pattern, and consciously. And instead we laughed at what a botch-up lunch was. She even talked about ringing the friend, the one she went to the cafe that this cafe was supposed to be with originally, and telling her about this amazing new cafe she'd found that she must visit because the food's wonderful. I know, a bit of tongue-in-cheek there, because of course my mum would not do that. But it was the fun, naughty mum that I had seen with others, and now I was getting to experience this. Well, after leaving the cafe, Mum wanted to walk across the road to the Whole Foods store. My over-responsibility kicked in and said, "No, Mum, it's too far for your hip. The road's too busy. Tell you what, I'll drive up the road and turn the car around, and we'll come back down and find a park on the other side." As we drove up the road to turn around, Mum goes, "Oh my gosh, there's the cafe I went to with my friend." Mum and I had gone to the wrong cafe. Yet again, there was laughter and giggles. Isn't it amazing how you can gripe and be upset about experiences you have at times, and yet not see the reason for the experience, not be open to it and an embracing of it, which was for Mum and I to have a laugh. But it was also to prompt her about going to the Whole Foods store, because there's more of the story to come. We may not have had the best lunch, but hey, we had a good time. We laughed and laughed that we had stuffed this up so colossally. As we came back down the road after turning around, we were going to stop at the Whole Foods store so Mum could get what she wanted, but there were absolutely no car parks outside. So I said to Mum, "Let's go round the corner and I'll find a park there." Mum said, "Let it go, it's fine. I can get what I need another day." But I'd stepped back into my over-responsibility mode again and was starting to be a little bit more forceful and said, no, I'm going to go around the corner and find a park and I will go in for you and get what you want. Mum said she wanted to go into the store. Well, there were no car parks around the corner either. And then I heard her say it again, and I really listened to my mum. It's okay. I can get what I want another day. So instead of imposing my over-responsibility process on my mother and being determined to get what she wanted, I said, okay, cool. And I let it go. Another change in the pattern. She also wanted to go to the disability store to see if they had something she wanted. Well, I knew where it was, so we headed back into the centre of the city. And as I wove through the streets, which are a bit of a maze, heading to the street where the disability store is, I came to discover the way I had approached the store, the way I had gone up the street had since been blocked off at that end. And it had been some time since I'd driven down that road. So I had to take a different route to get there. And as we came round the corner from the road that rerouted us, oh my gosh, I saw the whole food store had another store, one in the centre of the city. Mum and I had never seen it before, never noticed it before. Yet we'd driven up and down that road how many times? So I did a sudden and detour into, yes, they even had their own car parking area, which was right in front of the store and off the road. Wow, I had taken the route I did for one purpose, and I got sent on another route for more than one purpose, for two purposes. And this is what I love about how these processes unfold when you don't fight them, when you're always fascinated about them. They're magical. The second purpose neither of us were aware of, and that was to discover the other whole food store so Mum could get her products. But that was not the only reason. Yet again, another unknown magical reason for this whole adventure was about to unfold. We essentially were right outside the door of the store, so Mum did not have to walk far. This was amazing, and what a gift, thank goodness. She was able to actually go into the store, not walk very far, and get what she wanted. And you're probably going to have a giggle. It was a $2.50 amount of almond flour, because she wanted to make some type of brandy snap biscuits, I believe, which she still hasn't made. Well, the lovely lady who served us said to us, "You two have such beautiful blue eyes." Whew, I was a little taken back, as this is not something I often have said to me or I experience. I did say thank you, and I said to the lady, I'm used to people saying this about my mum, who's got pretty cool blue eyes, but not about me. And what was really interesting was that this was the second time I'd had feedback about my eyes that week. We talked a little, and she then asked me, the lady who was serving us, that is, if I was spiritual. And I just smiled. It's something a lot of people don't necessarily really see in me. And I don't go around sharing I'm spiritual because I know our spirituality is innate to us. It's a part of all of us. It's not something separate. It's not a gift. Spiritually, it's who we are. The lady talked to us a bit more, but we now had a customer behind us who was waiting, so it was time for us to go. The lady who was serving us said to me, "Can you please wait a bit? There's something I need to say to you." Well, time was creeping up for us because Mum's appointment with the physio was not too far away. But I said yes to the lady, and I asked Mum if she wanted to wait with me, to which she said yes as well. Well, when the woman asked me to wait, she only had that one customer that was behind us. Mum and I stood there for 10 minutes waiting for this lady as one customer after another kept coming up to the counter. It was insane, as there was only Mum, myself and two other people in the shop. When the lady asked me to wait, then this happened. Yet again, accept the process that this is how it's meant to be. But it did get to the point that I said to the lady who had served us, "I'm really sorry, but I have to get Mum to an appointment." She also had to pop into the disability store because, remember, that's where we were heading. And some of the focus had gone off of that, and I wanted to make sure she actually addressed what she needed to there. The lady who'd served us said to the customer she was serving, "Can you excuse me for a moment?" And they said yes. Well, she came out from behind the counter and came up to me and very quietly said to me, "I'm a clairvoyant. I don't charge for it, but I have to tell you something." What she shared with me was important for me to hear. It was something that reassured me. It reassured me over something that I'd been doubting and pondering on, that had been floating in the back of my mind for the last couple of days. Another gift that this process had given me. She said to me, "I have more to share with you, and I know I'll see you again." I gave her a big hug, thanked her, and I also said to her, "I've got some information for you too." Who would have thought this sequence of events, this sequence of detours, yucky lunches, lack of car parking spaces, was leading Mum to get her almond flour and me to get a message? Mum and I then went to the disability store and we laughed and had fun. And please note, not at the expense of anyone or any disabilities, but at the colour of the lazy boy she would love to have. And lazy boys don't always appear to be aesthetically brilliant, but this one was cool. And I was lying in it and looking over signs, not consciously. So we were having some fun. And then we needed to get to her appointment. Oh my gosh, you would not believe it. I got her there on time, but I went to the wrong place. And here, Mum had taken this step and I stuffed it up. I took her to where I'd gone when I went to the osteo, not their main office, which was 10 minutes away, which is where the physio was. But hey, we accepted the process. I rang the people and they still said, "If you come now, we can still take you." Awesome. My mum was finally going to get some help for her pain and her elbow. Something I've encouraged her, if not even nagged her at times, to do for over a year and longer. And she just kept saying each time, "There's nothing that can be done about it." And I kept saying, "But how do you know? And have you asked?" Yep, me holding responsibility again. It took my mum getting a pinched nerve in her elbow and us going to the city and me having found a really good osteo for her to actually take responsibility and act on having her elbow looked at. What we do to ourselves as human beings, we so often have to take ourselves to the edge at times to learn our lessons and to get it. As I dropped Mum off and I supported her walking up the ramp, I hate seeing her in the pain she's in with her hip. So bring on that operation. And I know she likes to just have my arm to steady her. Well, there was a woman sitting at the door and she said to us, "You two ladies look so beautiful." My mum is stunning for her age and she always looks beautiful and is very funky. I have my standard clothing on, clothing that I tend to wear a lot of, and I certainly was not feeling beautiful. Yep, I still have some work on me hearing, receiving and seeing this type of feedback and seeing more of the physical beauty of me. Well, Mum went straight into the physio and I went off to get the grocery shopping. And you're probably thinking, grocery shopping? This is a bit mundane. Well, we're going to switch to that now because this story continues. Alan and I have 8 cats. They love turning up at our doorstep. And we also feed some at night. Not sure how many, but we just feed them. A number of the cats are indoor cats, so cat litter is required. And not just any cat litter. It has to be the crystal cat litter because it absorbs the smell the best. Well, the cost of 8 cats can be impacting, and the price rises have been quite significant with cat food and cat litter, and like with so many products these days. So walking into the supermarket and seeing cat litter, and these are 15-litre bags, at $7 off a bag was a huge score. So picture this. When I walked in, I chose a small trolley, not a large one. I wasn't getting very much. It was just a quick stop at the grocery store. So 6 bags was my first purchase. Yep, through the checkout, load the car, and back into the store again for another 6 bags. There were only 12 on the shelf. And then I saw a mother and son, this is when I was getting the last 6 bags, who were watching me rather oddly. And I turned to them and said, "Do you want a bag or 2? And they said no. So I'm not sure why they were watching me, but I hope I was of entertainment for them. I did have a moment of guilt, my over-responsibility kicking in again, that someone might miss out on some of these bags. Then I reminded myself that there were 12 bags here at the price they were because I was meant to have them. Otherwise it would have been different. So I let the guilt go. I bet you can picture our back seat. It was filled with 15-litre cat litter bags. Love a deal. And what's really interesting is it seems every time I go to the city now, deals are just unfolding for me. And this has become more apparent since I created my I Deserve mini course, which if you're interested, there's a link below. When I got in the car, I rang Mum, as I knew she'd be finished and waiting for me. And I said to her, "Mum, I scored." And her immediate response to me was, "So have I, I've scored." Oh my gosh, I never hear my mum talk that way. So I was curious as, and I was like, "Woohoo!" When I picked her up, she was glowing. There was such a shift in her. The physio was a 30-something young man who does martial arts and was very spiritual. And I've used that word. He connected with Mum and he worked magic with Mum's elbow. He even said to Mum that there was so much more he could do to help her. Oh my gosh, my Mum, to see the light of hope and possibility back in her eyes and in her energy and in her voice when she had given up on anything being able to be done with her elbow and arm was not only beautiful. I felt the warmth of appreciation and joy fill every part of me. I had let go of responsibility and nagging her, and she had picked up the responsibility and was caring about her. And look what happened. See the power of unraveling these conditioned ways. She raved about him on the way home. Well, there were many more moments and many more conversations that were special that day and that continue each day since. There are still moments of some of that conditioning that happens, but there's a greater ease and fluidity and openness between me and my mum. And we even have lots of little laughs now, and the reactions and defensiveness has dissolved and it shifts very quickly if it does occur. I reflected on that day and just loved that such subtle shifts in releasing over responsibility and old patterns of conversations and responses and reactions and behaviours could bring about such beautiful, magical moments. Ones I treasured, ones I shared with my mum, ones that were happy experiences. I had a happy day with my mum, not just a shared experience. And every day can be like this for all of us if we consciously open up to them and if we embrace the opportunity and are committed to doing things differently. We can create those shifts, we can unravel those conditioned ways, and we can have different and new experiences. And if you are interested in exploring your over-responsibility, there's a link below for you to be able to access a free download workbook so that you can explore where are you holding responsibility for other people and why, and what steps can you take to do what I've done in your way, of course, though, where you release some of that over responsibility and the responsibility goes to the rightful person where it belongs. And it creates the space for differences in interactions, differences in processing, differences in behaviours. And it creates the space for you to make a difference. Not just to you and who you are, but to your relationships. And it supports the people around you, making a difference to their lives.